Yes, so this is pretty clear. There is a Q&A box in which you can ask questions at any point throughout the presentation, but know that your question might be answered throughout my presentation. We also prepare the frequently asked questions slides, so maybe also your question will be asked there. But if it's not the case, or if you want to ask questions before, you can do so in the Q&A box, and we'll address it at the end of the presentation. So this is the agenda for today. We will talk briefly about who we are. Then we will do a summary of the latest updates that we already sent by email, but we will do some reminders. Then we will go on the eligibility policy, recap and changes. Same thing about the calculation and payment policy. We will talk about workflow and timeline, and we will end the session with questions. So about who we are and what we do, the Canadian Journalism Collective is an independent organization created in 2024 by and for Canadian news businesses to ensure fair and equitable distribution of 100 million annually from Google to news organizations across the country. Born from Canada's groundbreaking Online News Act, we exist to support publishers and broadcasters from across the country, from independent local outlet to major networks, Indigenous news organization to official language minority media. The Online News Act aims to ensure that dominant platforms compensate news businesses when their content is made available on their services. And a quick word about the Act. So the Act creates a bargaining framework to ensure that platforms compensate news businesses fairly. It encourages platforms to reach voluntary commercial agreements with a range of news businesses. The Act received royal assent on June 22nd, 2023. The Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, so the CRTC, is responsible for overseeing the bargain framework under the Act. And it is under this framework that the CRTC gave their exemption to Google, and that the CJC was mandated to administer the fund by Google. So updates and next steps. So far, we have distributed $58 million to over 400 news businesses across the country. So for the second round of funding that will open next week, we have tried to make some improvement in the application timeline and process. So we have put in place a secure online application portal with individual logins, so you will know where your application is at. The eligibility verification and eligible hours review will take place simultaneously, so at the same time. All eligibility decisions, eligible and ineligible, will also be sent at the same time, so after everyone is reviewed. And contrary to first year, there will be only one single payment per successful applicant, and this payment will happen in the winter of 2026. There will also be a clear and timely appeal process for ineligible applicants that will be communicated. So a reminder of the important dates that we sent in our update in early August. So the review of eligible newsroom and broadcasters hours from Ernst & Young is happening now and is almost done, so that the final settlement year one payment will happen throughout September. So we are almost at the end of this process for year one. The application for year 2, the application portal for non-Indigenous applicants will open next week on September 9th and will be open until October 3rd, 2025. For Indigenous applicant, the portal will be opening on September 16 and will close on October 16, so a month also to apply. And the payments for year 2 will be disbursed in the winter of 2026, like said previously. So about the broadcast eligibility policy for year 2, so the highlights are that eligible categories for broadcasters are QCJO, licensed campus, community, or native stations, and other similar community stations with different requirement. If you want to know the specificity of the categories, you have a link here to the broadcaster eligibility policy, and it is available on a resource page on our website. It's very, we have a new website, as you might know, and we have made the documents really accessible in the resource section. So we really encourage you to read through the policies that are listed there in the resource page. So the effective dates that will be compensated for in year 2 will be the ones included between January 1st, 2024 and December 31st, 2024. So we are always paying the year before. So all the content, all the hours that you submit have to be for the year 2024. So the changes that we have made for the second year is that if your news business qualifies as one of the below categories, you will automatically be eligible to receive funds without further verification. So you will still have to provide for QCJO, CRA, letter or communication that designates you as a qualified Canadian journalism organization and whose status is active. Your content has to be available on Google, made available on Google also. For licensed campus, community, or native stations, you are licensed by the CRTC, so you will be asked to provide your CRTC license under paragraph 9(1)(b) of the Broadcasting Act as a campus station, community station, or a native station, and whose status is active at the time of application to receive funding from the CCJ. And so if you provide all the criterias for QCJO, licensed campus, community, or other similar community stations, you will be eligible for funding. And again, we invite you to look at the criterias for those categories in our broadcaster eligibility policy. The other change that we've made is that instead of the CJC verification team reviewing randomly selected content from your website, applicants, so you will select the content you want the CJC to review over a continuous 3-week period. So you choose the 3-week period included in the year 2024, and you submit all your news content from this 3-week period. You have to provide a link to each news item, individual link to each item that you want the CJC verification to review. If your business content is in a language other than English or French, you will be asked to submit translated excerpts of your news content when you apply in the portal. So on the calculation payment policy, so highlights. So of course you have to choose between applying as a broadcaster or a publisher. So broadcaster news businesses must declare their eligible employee hours, while publisher news businesses must declare their number of eligible newsroom employees. So in each case, the number declared must correspond to their operations during the 2024 calendar year. So I will show you an example of how to calculate the hours. So if your news business distributes its content, whether written, audio, or video, exclusively online or in print, and you do not transmit programs by television or radio waves, nor indirectly through a distribution undertaking as defined in the broadcasting payment calculation policy, you should apply as a publisher. So this is you should check this out if you have a doubt. For example, podcasting and streaming news businesses that distribute their content online and do not have a CRTC license, for example, should apply as publishers. And so the calculation is based on eligible newsroom, and I will show you how it is made. And so how to determine the number of employees hours spent creating original news content in 2024. So the change is that we have removed the term FTE, so full-time employee, as it wasn't clear what it referred to or what the required minimum hours were to be considered an FTE. So employees can be employed for any numbers of hours as long as they are on the payroll and receive a T4. So you have employees on payroll and you receive T4s, you're eligible. Your employees can be part-time or full-time during the year of 2024. And the employee's position includes working on the eligible tasks that qualify, and I will show you the list as a reminder later in the presentation. So example of calculating your employee hours. If an employee worked part-time in 2024 or split their duties, only the hours spent on original news production should be counted. So for example, if an employee works 1,040 hours a year, so an average of 20 hours per week, and spends half of that time on tasks that qualify, such as proofreading, original news content, news gathering, and the other half on non-qualifying tasks, such as summarizing existing news, then only half of those hours per week should be reported for 2024, so 10 hours per week. And you can use the same method for each employee involved in original news production. So you can add together the qualifying hours from all employees to determine the total number of eligible hours for 2024. Again, this is all detail in the policy that is in the resource page of our website. But I will show you an excerpt in the next slide. And so here you have it, calculating employee hours. This is the example I just told you about, but you have it in view here. So you really have to calculate how many hours per employee qualifies as original news producing. And I will show you in the next slide what is this list. The list is listed in our policy and eligibility documents on our website again. And so this is a task that qualify as original news production. So news gathering, when we are talking about news gathering, it's more than rewriting. It's really produced originally for your publication. So it's not repurposing. And I will talk more deeply about what that means. So story development, verification and fact-checking, filming, writing and editing, broadcasting and production, approval and review, publishing and distribution, promotion and engagement, and post-publication. Tasks that do not qualify as original news production, content aggregation, expression of personal viewpoints, advertorial content, legal review, and archiving. So here we have prepared a frequently asked questions section. So we will go through them together. So, am I eligible if my journalists are freelancers and not employees? So, hours for freelancers are not eligible. So, by regularly employed, this is the change from FTE, right? So, we are talking about regularly employed. So, people who are on the payroll, even if they're doing just a few hours, they have to be on payroll and they have to be issued a T4. So regular employee, we mean employees who are issued T4 and who are on the payroll. So you need two to be eligible for funding. Are volunteers eligible? Volunteers hours are not eligible. Are owners' hours eligible? They are if the owner's tasks are contributing to the production of original and general interest news. So if they are doing the work, then their hours are eligible. What if I don't have a CRTC license and you don't fit in any of the previous categories? You can apply as a producers of news interest, of general and news interest. The criteria for this category is listed in our eligibility calculation policy. So look at the criteria. You have to meet a few of them, including producing content in Canada, producing news, but you can apply even if you don't have a CRTC license. But again, like we said, also check if you would rather apply as a publisher. My content is not in English or in French. Sorry for the mistake there. So our verification team speaks several languages, so French, English, Arabic, and Mandarin. But you will also be asked to provide translated transcripts of your content to facilitate verification. And in the portal, there will be a field specific to do that. So what is considered general news? So it's the content that's not focused on a particular topic, such as industry-specific news, sports, recreation, arts, lifestyle, or entertainment. It must also not be intended to promote the interests of or report on the activities of a specific organization, an association, or its member. So the term original news content includes content for which research, writing, editing, and formatting are conducted by and for the organization. So therefore, whether news content is original depends on the active involvement as a journalist in its creation. So original news content is produced through gathering facts and should show evidence of first-hand reporting, such as independent research, interviews, and field work. For example, a news program or report about an event should be original if it's produced or reported by a journalist and is based on first-hand knowledge that the journalist gained by conducting independent research, attending or witnessing the event, or interviewing people who organized or attended the event. How do I determine what part of my news business is news? So it's the news programs that are considered eligible for radio station, and same with the television station. So it's the news programs that are considered news. So when you submit over your 3-week period, you submit only the part of your programming that is considered news according to the different criterias and our policies. Are LGI hours eligible? Yes, they are eligible as long as they are on a payroll. So LGI journalism is accepted because the funding comes from different sources. So federal funding versus Google. So you can include your LGI hours as long as they are on a payroll and contributing to the production of original news. How does it work if I have several outlets, so our radio stations? A news business may run several stations, but not all of which would be eligible to participate in the bargaining framework. So you have to sort out which stations does news, or how many, what is the proportion of news that they're doing as to other sort of content. So for example, only a music program would probably would not be eligible because it's not considered news. But if you have a program on current things that are happening, or interviews with politicians, and it brings new content, then it would work. And so this is an excerpt of how the portal application will look. So you have a scoop today, a preview of what it's going to look like. And this is in the case that you have several news outlets. So you will be asked to provide the name of the news outlet. And so again, when you apply, if you have several stations, or television or radio stations, it has to be the entity that issues T4 and that have to apply. Okay, so you will be asked a bunch of things here. And then in the second part of this page on the form, at the end, you will be asked to provide the numbers of employees claimed by the news outlet. So you do one application for all with all the stations that you have, and you will be asked to provide content for each of those stations. So workflow and timeline. So a reminder that the application portal opens for non-Indigenous applicants next week on September 9th until October 3rd. And Indigenous applicants, the portal will open from September 16 to October 16. And once you start applying, the motion will be set. So we will do a lot of steps at the same time, so simultaneously. So the verification team will evaluate eligibility right away. The verification team of hours, so Ernst & Young, will also be doing the employees' hours at the same time. And then eligible and ineligible determinations letters will be sent. You will have a limited time to go through the dispute process if you are deemed not eligible. And you will receive one payment, the only one, in the winter of 2026. So this is the timeline that we are looking at. And so this brings us to the question period, if you feel like we haven't answered any of your questions.
Hi, everybody. So there was a bunch of questions that came through in the Q&A box that we responded to. So right now we have no open questions. Please feel free if there's anything you think hasn't been clear about what Gabrielle presented, please feel free to throw your question in the box and then we can answer it live. Okay, and there's a question about in the last round of funding, how much of the money went to Indigenous campus or community stations? So I don't have that data on hand, but we can absolutely report on that. And so just to be clear, in the first year of administering the fund, exceptionally, there were two payments. So an initial payment that went out that was 60% of what eligible applicants were estimated to receive based on their submitted hours. And then the assessment is happening currently to land on the exact number of eligible hours per eligible applicant, and then there'll be a second payment. So once we've paid out the 98 million in about a month, we'll be completed with that process, and we'll be able to report on how much money was sent to the different categories. So we'll be able to get back to you hopefully within a few weeks on that. There's a question about hours for local sports reporting is eligible. So Laura or Gabrielle?
Laura, my thinking is that sport is excluded from being considered news.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a nuanced question because it depends on what the kind of mix of overall reporting that you're doing. So if you have a news outlet that's completely dedicated to sports reporting, they wouldn't be eligible because the Online News Act kind of gives us a framework of what we can fund, and sports is actually specifically if the majority of your content is focused on sports or lifestyle or culture, then you wouldn't be eligible. But if you're covering a wide range of topics and sports is a part of that, then we wouldn't exclude. So basically, the guideline is that news businesses must produce news content of public interest that's primarily focused on matters of general interest and reports of current events. So like that word primarily is really important. You have to be primarily focused on matters of general interest and not primarily focused on a particular topic, such as industry-specific news, sports, recreation, arts, lifestyle, or entertainment. So those are two really important pieces, primarily focused on matters of general interest and not primarily focused on a particular topic like sports, recreation, arts, lifestyle, or entertainment. It's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. And then another question from Denise about learning more about the process for anyone who's new to this. So Laura is the program director on our website. If you click about us, you can find her, and then you'll be able to ask any specific questions that you feel weren't answered. There's a question about the funding window on September 16th. So yes, absolutely. That is also looking at your news production in 2024, but there's a specific application form for Indigenous news businesses. So that is, rather than opening next week, it's opening on September 16th, and it's open for a little bit longer. So there's a question. So 2 journalists are necessary to be eligible. Does that mean if we have 1 full-time journalist, we are not eligible?
Yes, that's you need 2. So if you are only one, it doesn't work. But you can have a second one that's only working a few hours a week and who's on the payroll. But yes, this is a minimum requirement, is that you have to.
Mm-hmm. And Laura, maybe you can speak to the exceptions to having 2 journalists.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are licensed by the CRTC as being a campus, community, or native station, we are looking at your CRTC license, making sure that it's valid. And in that case, you don't have to have 2 employees. And, just in case it's helpful, if you have 1 person on payroll who's full-time and 1 person who's working 8 hours a week, 4 hours a week, They are not full-time, but you do have 2 people on payroll that would still meet the requirement. So I realize that that's a challenging constraint for some businesses, but I just wanted to make folks aware of the flexibility that we have. But yes, you do have to have 2 employees on payroll.
And there's a question about reporting on local culture and local business news. So if someone's really focused on local reporting, is that considered eligible?
It is. So you can absolutely have, a station that's focused on a certain area of coverage. The important thing is that your information is for your a broader community. So it's not just for like a specific business people. So if it's for a broader audience, a general interest audience, then your content is eligible, even if it focuses on a specific topic.
And can you explain a little bit more about this new shift for year 2, where news businesses are submitting 3 weeks of content? A little bit more information about that, the time period, how many articles or how many links to news content they're submitting?
Yeah. So like we explained briefly, so first year was the verification agents. They would go to your website, and then they were randomly selecting a range of a dozen content to verify. This year we are letting you choose the period. So you have to choose a 3 week continuing period all throughout 2024. So it can be any of those through 3 weeks within this year. And then you submit all your news content, so what you consider to be news, and you have up to 100 link to those news content that you can submit. You can submit less, of course, but the cap is 100, and you have to individually provide a link to the individual content that you want us to review. I don't know if it's clear enough.
And can you talk a little bit more about news content that's produced not in English or French? What's the process by which they are submitting that in order to be understood by the verification team? And also, are there any different types of rules in terms of original news production for 3rd language content?
No, these are the same rules as we are still asking that you produce original general interest news. And when you apply and when you submit your links, you can also submit some transcript of your content, and you can use, it doesn't need to be a perfect transcription. You can use, like online tools that would make the transcription very easy to do. We just want to have a sense of the news that you're doing. And there will be a field within the portal where you can upload a transcript of your content.
Okay, so there's a question about whether their content, which is produced in Mandarin and Cantonese, do they need to subtitle the whole 3 weeks of news? So I think this is similar to what you just explained, Gabrielle, but there's no need to subtitle your news content. What's helpful is just a transcript into English, which you can use artificial intelligence to do, to English or French. We just need to see the links so that we can ensure that it was online, it's indexed on Google, but you don't need to provide subtitles for your audio or visual content. So can you explain a little bit about the Indigenous application process and what the policy is to ensure Indigenous identity?
Yes, it's a good question. I don't have it, Angela, but there is specification. Actually, there are some specification for Indigenous. I could maybe.
Yeah, I think Laura, maybe you can jump in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is about. Let me just scroll down to the question here. So for Indigenous applicants, if you're applying as an Indigenous news outlet, you'll apply starting in September 16th. And so your portal won't be open next week when the other portal opens. And the way that we verify Indigenous identity is by asking applicants to provide an affirmation of Indigenous identity for either the owners of the business, if it's a for-profit commercial outlet, or the board of directors, if it's a nonprofit. So if you're a for-profit Indigenous news outlet, we're going to ask for an affirmation of Indigenous identity, which is a form that you sign clarifying which kind of documentation you could provide to demonstrate your Indigenous identity for each of your owners. So this is to make sure that the outlets that we're funding are indeed Indigenous owned. And then you'll need to provide an affirmation of Indigenous identity for each of the key roles in your newsroom that are occupied by Indigenous individuals. And so this is to make sure that you're meeting the criteria of being Indigenous owned and operated. And so we aren't asking you to provide specific pieces of identification to the CJC. We want to respect your privacy. It's just a form where you sign stating that if there was a question, if we needed to look into it, you would be able to produce a certain type of documentation. And so that could be a letter from your band council. It could be a status card. There's a variety of different forms of documentation that we'd welcome. And if you have more questions about that, don't hesitate to get in touch. And for the nonprofit example, we'd want to see an affirmation of Indigenous identity from the majority of your board of directors. So of course, we understand maybe the board of directors isn't 100% Indigenous, but we just want to know that the majority of your board is Indigenous and that key roles in your newsroom are held by Indigenous individuals.
Hey, thanks. Can you speak to if a newsroom is run by journalists who are husband and wife in community newsroom? So I think it's just a question of, I think this relates to the question about owners and journalists and how that works.
Mm-hmm. So you can totally be husband and wife. We won't ask what's the relationship between the journalists in your newsroom. So as long as you are both on a payroll and you're both paying yourselves to do news, then there's no problem. You are totally eligible.
Okay. And then can you speak a little bit more about the audit process that we referred to? So there's the assessment of eligible hours and how that works and who's doing it.
Yeah, so we are doing it right now for year one, and we will do it again for year two. So it's an independent firm that's called Ernst & Young. So they are asking, they will be asking you some document to prove the hours that you are claiming. They do not want T4s. They want, because they don't want personal information on your journalist. But they have provided a whole list of other documents that you can send them to prove the hours, and we will list them on our website to help you out. So they will be asking on their side for the document that they need.
And just one small correction: they want T4s, but they need to be redacted.
Yeah.
So you are, yeah, exactly. So you're sending in T4s, but the personal information is not to be shared. There's a few more questions about translation, and I wonder if you can speak to, someone's asking if we have preferred translation services. Okay, so let's ask that one first, preferred translation services. So I think we really are not expecting anyone to go to any expense to provide us with the translations if your content is not in English or French. The assessment team just needs to understand the content to make sure that it's based on original news production. And there's a question: many platforms already provide video translations. Should we add our own translations to content that is in English or French? And I think this is the same. I mean, the verification team, if it's already subtitled, I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. We don't want to add like too much, too more work to what you're providing. We just want to be able to assess your content. But yeah, if you can add, if it's not more work to add translation, you can. But if not, we're asking for a minimum translating format, so just so we can see the kind of content you're doing.
Okay, and then can you speak a bit more? There's questions around can you recap the information around freelancers and volunteers?
Yes. So freelancers hours and volunteers hours are not eligible. And this was CRTC ruling. So yeah, I mean, volunteers were never, I think, part of the act, or and freelancers. Yeah, it was a ruling from the CRTC to not include them.
Okay, and then can you say if there's a broadcaster who is QCJO, do they also need to submit 3 weeks of links?
They do, just so that we can also have an archive of the content. So yeah, you still need to submit content, but there will be no other steps after that.
It's important that everyone who submits to be eligible is that your content is indexed on Google. So it's another way that we can ensure that, because there's some QCGOs that are not online, don't produce their news online, in which case they wouldn't be eligible for compensation.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question about where people can find all the criteria for the upcoming year. And yeah, maybe you can just talk about where they can find all the information.
Yeah, so they are on our website. So actually, I could also almost pull it out, but our website is very, very easily find. So it's CCJ CJC.ca. And then you will see on the menu at the top right, there's a page that's called, an onglet that's called resource. You click on it, and then you will see our listed policies. You click on them. So we have eligibility and calculation payment policies for publishers, and the same for broadcasters and for indigenous the news business. So yeah, it's really on our website, and I've put the links in the presentation also. So when we will make the presentation available, you will also be able to access.
Okay. And then just a question, I think maybe for Laura, can you explain why we've set up this level of scrutiny? Why was the program set up to have this level of scrutiny on their news production in the year?
Yeah, so I think this is really about our responsibility in distributing the funds to make sure that we're carrying out the intent of the act, and that we're providing funding to news businesses that are producing original news content. And so I really appreciate that this does put a burden on businesses, and appreciate the feedback. And the reason for the level of scrutiny is so that we can ensure that we're carrying out our goals in the Online News Act. So thanks for the feedback.
And there's a question: do broadcasters submit content for review that was published on the broadcaster's website but may not have been included in the broadcast? Great question. Do you want to take that one? Yeah.
Yeah, we'd really welcome all news content produced over that 3-week period. And so if it's online, absolutely, please include it.
Yeah.
And there's another question about the audit process for 2024. So yes, we understand that this year it was very rushed. There was a real desire to have the audit process take place in a very short amount of time in order for the second payment to go out in September. But the 2020, the year 2 that's assessing 2024, we have a much more extended time frame to do the work. So it will be, the request will come in, you'll have adequate time to prepare your documents. For Ernst & Young, we'll be there to support you as needed. So we hope that the process will be much more user-friendly in year 2.
Yeah. And if I can add, we are also given some feedback to Ernst & Young about, making the portal and the application, smoother and easier. So, yeah.
Okay. I have a question. Our news content is only up on the website for 3 days. So when they submit their links over the 3-week period for 2024, should we produce a special link for the CJC?
Yes. So it's like if your content is hidden behind a paywall, right? So I'm guessing after 3 days you take your content somewhere and you archive it somewhere. So we would have to be able to get to it. So yeah, provide a special link or login with password if your content is behind a paywall or in an archive in the back end of your website.
And I think
sorry, go ahead.
the other key piece here is that your content's accessible by Google. And so we would need to be able to check that the news content that you're producing is made available by Google. And so just make sure that when you remove it after 3 days, or during that 3-day period, that it's still somehow available by Google, because that's one of our funding constraints, is that it must be made available by Google. And I saw here at the end of your question, Todd, the question from Todd Yee. If we're looking at a 3-week period, there'd probably be 600 news items. And I think that's a great point. And so what we've done is we've just capped it at 100 links. So either we want to see all the links you're producing over a 3-week period, or 100 links, whichever comes first. So if you don't produce 100 links over a 3-week period, no problem. If you produce more than 100 links in a 3-week period, so 100 pieces of content, then just you'll be cut off after 100, and we'll use those links for our assessment.
Great. And then there's another question about if a program is submitted in Spanish, are we looking for a summary of the program or the whole program transcribed?
That's a good question. I would say summary with maybe like a few of the, like not necessarily the whole program if it lasts for an hour, but maybe like a third of it. So just so that we can have a sense more in detail of the program content.
Yeah, and I think what you want to be thinking about it is how to indicate to the verification team that it's news of general interest, how to indicate that it's not lifestyle or music or another type of content that isn't eligible, that there's original news gathering that went into the production of the piece. Okay, so there's a question. So the primary purpose of the content audit is to confirm presence of the content on Google. So that is correct. Our mandate is to compensate news businesses for their content being indexed on Google in 2024. So that is what we are compensating for. So if your content wasn't listed on Google in 2024, you're eligible for compensation. And that's what we're trying to assess is, are you eligible? And if yes, how much compensation do you receive, which is based on the number of journalists you employ. So broadcasters are only required to keep loggers of the content for 30 days by CRTC regulation. After that, all logs are deleted because of the storage requirements. So she wants to confirm that they're only providing links to audiovisual content that exists online, which must be dated within a 3-week period. Laura, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can answer that. And so exactly what we're looking for is the content that's online. It doesn't have to be all the content that's broadcast, because we're just concerned with the content that's being made available by Google. And the purpose of the content audit is both, as you're saying, to confirm the presence of the content on Google and to confirm that it's original news content it's of general interest, and that it is not focused on a particular topic that's industry specific. So it's not for the mining industry, or it's not for the agricultural industry, or any industry. You know, if it was any industry you can imagine. It also can't be focused on sports, recreation, arts, lifestyle, or entertainment. So those are the things that we're assessing. Is it available on Google? Is it primarily general interest? And is it not primarily focused on a particular topic?
Okay, and then another question about how long they have to apply. So the portal opens next week on September 9th, and then you have until October 3rd to submit. So once it opens, you'll have time to navigate through the portal. You'll be able to save your progress and continue later. And of course, check in with any staff with questions that you might have. Okay, so people are looking for criteria being provided in advance of the year. So this year, the documentation was sent out at the end of July, and the portal opens in September. I think that's great feedback, that it would be really helpful for you to have the criteria several months in advance, especially for broadcasters that are going to have to make sure that they can go back and access their content. So that's really good feedback. Okay, so there's a question, who is being issued login credentials for the portal? So if we applied in year one but did not qualify, will we still receive the login credentials? So maybe you can just talk a little bit about how the login works for the portal.
Yeah, so we have, so as soon as you apply, you will be receiving a login. So even if you didn't apply, because it is a all new system, so it's really, really different from year one, where it was basically, you know, a form. So now it's everyone is starting from zero with this new portal. So you will all have to create a login and all have access to it, to your application in the portal.
That's right. If you already applied, there's some information that will auto-populate, but as Gabrielle said, it's a brand new system, so there's no disadvantage for anyone who didn't receive funding last year. Everyone's sort of starting from zero. Actually, every year, everyone is going to be applying fresh.
Yeah.
The question, we have one full-time journalist and one half-time manager. The manager does some of the news production activities, such as distribution, promotion. Could this count as two journalists and then just count the manager's hours that are spent on journalism? That's a great question. Yeah.
Yes, this works. So again, like we're saying in the calculation policy, so yeah, you declare any numbers of hours from any of your journalists with the qualifying task list. So your manager, if they do, I don't know, 10 out of their 20 hours on news production, you declare those 10 hours that are eligible with the qualifying task list. So yes, this absolutely works.
Okay, and there's other questions. So for a station that's producing content in Punjabi, for example, if they're translating news received via Newswire, CN News, if they're translating that news into Punjabi, is it considered original content if that content, or that repurposed content in a different language is then made available on Google?
So no, it's not, because it's existing news elsewhere. So original news producing really have to be for and by your own publication, your own station. So if you take a press release and you translate it from a newswire, it doesn't count as original news, because you're not the one who made it initially, even if you translate it into another language.
Okay, and then there's more questions about freelancers, but I think that we might have covered that as much as we can. We understand that it has a really negative impact on certain types of smaller news businesses. But the CRTC actually did make a ruling which really lays out the regulation of how we could administer the program, that we're not allowed to include freelancers. So, but we do appreciate the feedback, and we understand that this makes it difficult. So the question about an info session for Indigenous news outlets. So
Yes.
the administration of the fund is not very different for Indigenous news outlets and for non-Indigenous news outlets. There's a special porter that's a little bit more streamlined and accessible for Indigenous news outlets, which is why there's a separate opening date. So we hadn't planned an info session, but if you do think that would be helpful, we're really happy to put one together. So that's great feedback, and we can absolutely do that. No problem. And okay, great. All right, well then we'll do that. Thanks, Tamara. That's great feedback. Okay, this is a really good question. What about live streamed radio content? This would be discoverable by Google, but it doesn't live online past the live stream. How are we to provide links? So that's a great question. Laura, this came up a lot in year one. Maybe you can talk about how we address that.
Yeah, so if you have a live stream, it's almost impossible for our verification agents to go back in time and listen to content that was produced in 2024. And it's really difficult for us to verify that it was made available by Google because we're not able to search different news stories. And so what we would recommend is that if you have a live stream, you can put either the transcript or the audio online with, headers for each of the programs. And that way you could be considered eligible.
Okay, and there's another question. If there's going to be dedicated funding set aside for Indigenous campus and community broadcasters in the same way that CBC is afforded dedicated funding. So the framework for how the funding is set up isn't decided upon by the CJC. So there's a dedicated amount for CBC, which is 7%. Broadcasters have 30%, and then publishers have the remainder. So within that, our mandate is to distribute the funding equitably in that every single broadcaster has the same dollar amount per employee, no matter what type of, how big or small they are, and every single publisher has the same dollar amount per employee. So we don't have a mandate, or we're not allowed to carve out within that specific pots of funding for specific types of news organizations. Okay, so I think that covers the question. If there's any other questions that we haven't answered, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We do have a bit more time. Otherwise, as Gabrielle said, please go to our website and take some time to review. If you go to the resources page on our website, you'll see Broadcaster Eligibility Policy Year 2 and Broadcaster Payment Calculation Policy Year 2. And those are what you want to read ahead of the applying, and then please reach out if you have any questions. Okay, so there's another question. For campus community stations with one journalist, are these stations eligible for funding if there's a multi-month gap in content production due to funding shortfalls, or does that gap make them ineligible? And I'm glad you asked that, Genevieve, because there are different rules about the 2 employees for campus community stations. So maybe you can speak to that, Laura or Gabrielle.
Sure, yeah. So if you are a campus and community radio station, then you're not required to have 2 employees. And we'll just be checking to make sure that you do have the appropriate CRTC license saying that you're a campus community or native radio station. And as long as you hold that license, then you'd be considered eligible. And then in terms of the hours you can only claim hours worked by employees, but you would be eligible.
Okay, and they're asking, is there a way to preview the application form, or do we have to start populating the form in order to see every page?
Yeah, you're able to click through and look at all the fields before you've populated the whole things. We got a lot of feedback that last year it was really challenging to fill out the form because you couldn't see the end of the form until you'd completed each step. And so there's a few required fields that you'll need to fill out to get to the next step, but you can click all the way through. You just can't submit until you've filled all of the fields.
Okay, and I've got a question here. In a community broadcaster that also runs the local newspaper as a not-for-profit, playing both publishing and broadcasting employees? That's another good question that came up a lot in year one.
That's a great question. So it really has to do with the ownership structure. If your news business, if you have one corporate entity that owns both the newspaper and the radio station, all the employees are considered under the broadcast pool. If you have two separate corporate entities and one owns the newspaper and one owns the radio station, they would apply as two separate news businesses. So I hope that answers your question, and it really has to do with the way your business is incorporated.
Right. Every news business is doing a separate application. And if they have multiple news outlets that the news business owns, they will be filling in the links over the 3-week period for every news outlet. Okay, there's a question about new news undertakings, and I think that question is probably related to the year that we're looking at and the rules of when someone needs to be, when does the company need to exist? So basically, you need to be an entity as of January 2024.
Yes.
I see there's a question about what it means when your content is available on Google. So the idea with the funding is that this is compensation for intellectual property that is being used by Google. And so in order for us to consider a news business to be eligible, they must be producing content that's made available on Google. So what this means in our context, you can see it in our eligibility policy. So I really recommend everyone take a look at the broadcaster eligibility policy. But what this means is that the name of the program and the episode should be something that comes up if you search it in Google. So if I take the name of your news program and search it in Google, I should be able to find links to all the news content that you're producing. And so this is sort of why it's really difficult with a live stream, is that we're not able to verify that your content's available on Google if we just search the name of your episode or your program. And so if you want more in-depth information about that, go to our eligibility policy. But overall, what we're going to do is we're going to check that the title of your episode of your program comes up when we do a Google search. Yeah.
Okay, and then so we're saying that each news business, so each corporate entity, needs to file a separate application. However, you also mentioned the applicant is a corporate entity listed on the T4. What if these are not the same? For example, say there are multiple outlets that are owned by different subsidiaries, but payroll is processed through only one of the subsidiaries.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So you'll need to apply based on kind of like the parent company that owns all of the different news outlets. And then the news outlets will be listed in your application. So all of your different news outlets will be listed. There's a section for your news outlets. And we'd like you to provide a breakdown so that we can see, you know, how many employees are working on your different news outlets. But I think as long as the applicant name matches the name that's on the T4s, then I think you know, it might take a little back and forth if there's any confusion, but that should work overall.
Okay. So if we only need the links to all the content, do we want them to reinstate their content online? If it was online and it's no longer online, do we want them to reinstate it?
I would say yes, because we have to be able to find it online at the time of verification. So when you apply. So because this is one of the constraints of the regulations of the act, so of our deal with Google. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question about campus and community stations. So they're not required to have 2 employees in order to be eligible, but they're only receiving compensation based on their employees and not on their volunteers. Maybe just a few words about that and how we're trying to assess the volume of news production.
Yeah, I think we hear you and understand the kind of different model of campus and community stations, and I think that, you know, it would be really cool if that kind of work could be recognized, but we're really constrained to funding only hours that are worked by employees, and so we have to work within that. And I hear you, and these are the framework that we're working in.
Okay, and there's another question. We're moving to pay 1.1 journalists, but have been operating for over 10 years of Google ranked civic content. Can our newly funded journalists be compensated? And so just to remind you, we're looking at your operations in 2024. So the having 2 employees and the hours worked, what we're going to be looking, and the news kind of that you're linking to is all related to 2024. Okay, if the link is there, but the content is not, can we provide you a different way to access the content?
The content on the website or on Google on the website?
I think so. I think essentially if the link is there, but the content is no longer housed there. I know there's a question about not being able to keep the content out, considering the volume that's being produced by some of these broadcasters.
Yeah, exactly. But your content must be somewhere else, right? Like in the back end of your website or an archiving space, and we would need access to where you store this content.
Okay, and the content, they're just saying it's stored offline. So what do we do with these situations if the link is still there, but the content is no longer stored online for storage reasons?
I think the crucial part for us is that the content's available by Google.
Yeah.
And so if the content isn't available by Google anymore because it's not
Index, yeah.
Yeah, then we wouldn't be able to count it as part of the original news content. So that's really the sticking point for us. And yeah, I think that's the best way to explain it, is that our hard limit is that the content has to be made available by Google. And we're working within that.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about podcasts?
Yeah. So podcasts are eligible. And if your podcast is not distributed on any airways, so if it's not broadcast over the radio, then you would be considered a publisher. And if your content is broadcast over the radio, so you're part of a radio station, your podcast goes out every week, then you would be considered a broadcaster. And it really comes down to the way that broadcasting is understood in the Broadcasting Act. So if your podcast is 100% online, you're a publisher. If it's broadcast over the airways in any capacity, then you're a broadcaster.
Okay. So what if we had 3 radio stations plus an online news page? Does that mean that for our 3-week period, we are okay to just provide links to the online news articles and we don't have to send links for the radio audio? And I'm assuming this is one applicant, one news business with radio stations and a website.
So you would need to provide links to all the news outlets that you're claiming employee hours for. So if you're claiming employee hours for your radio stations, then we'd need to have links for your radio stations. If you're only claiming employee hours for your online publication, then there's no problem, and only provide links for your online platform.
Okay, and so the question about if the content was available on Google in 2024, so the compensation year, but it's not currently available on Google. And so I think this comes back to the question of we need to be able to verify that it was on Google. If we can't verify that it's on Google, that it's impossible to assess it according to the same criteria that everyone else is facing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's a question for those concerned about space. I think this is storage space. Does this transcript suffice as a news article if they're concerned about audio storage online? And this came up a bunch in the last year. So yeah, we can speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. A transcript is a great example because someone can search the headline of a news program, it comes up in a Google search, and we can verify that it's original news content.
Okay. Well, 2025 had the same funding criteria. So essentially our policies are established by our board of directors that has a broadcasting council and a publishing council, and they finalize any policy changes that happen. So what we do is we have conversations with the sector over the course of administering the fund, and then we bring proposals forward, and but the final decisions are decided upon by our board. So it is possible that there will be changes, and I think it's really helpful to have feedback from applicants so we can see what is challenging or what could have improvement. Okay, so right. I think there's questions about fair compensation for Indigenous or campus and community broadcasters. So again, I think it's really important to note that we're operating the fund where the eligibility criteria are dictated by a piece of federal legislation. So the Online News Act is translated into the eligibility criteria for this fund. So we are not able to significantly change the way that it's being run if it's not in accordance with the act. So, you know, I understand that if you don't have as many employees, it means that you're not receiving as much money, but the equitable distribution is based on the same dollar amount for every broadcaster and every publisher. Okay, so I think so if a podcast format involves 2 people, can they both be considered journalists?
Again, yeah, I was gonna say,
Go
depends
ahead, Gabrielle.
if they comply with the list of tasks. So, you know, the list of tasks, I've just put the headers in the slide, but if you go to our website, you will see we have a very, very detailed list of tasks. So if your, your 2 podcasters are doing tasks that are journalistically within this list, then you would be eligible. But you really have to go through the list to see if you comply with it.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question about this live stream issue. So we mentioned that the challenge was trying to qualify based on live stream content, is that we cannot verify after the fact where it was made available by Google. If we report news audio that was originally broadcast on our live stream in 2024, even if we're only posting the inserted audio file now in 2025, would that count towards us being able to qualify for year 2 funding?
Okay, so you would be posting excerpted audio now that was originally broadcast in 2024. I think as long as it's like clearly designated and marked that it's produced in 2024, we'd be able to consider it. But I think we probably need to do an in-depth review and just to really ensure that it's meeting all the criteria and that you're being considered in a way that's fair with all the other applicants.
Okay. And there's another question. If we have 2 full-time employees and a few part-time employees, but no T4s for the part-time staff, should we still include them? So 2 employees means you are eligible for funding. So your eligibility assessment, if you produce news of general interest, should be okay. But in terms of the hours claimed, you're going to need to show that the language that we're operating under is that they're regularly employed. And so the easiest way to prove that is T4s. There are some other ways to show regular employment. And so if you choose to submit those hours, when Ernst & Young, the hours assessors, gets in touch with you, they're going to be asking for other types of proof if you cannot provide T4s. T4s is the most, if they're on payroll, that's generally our bar. It's not impossible that there's another way to show that they were employed, but that's something that you'll be in conversation with the auditors on. Okay, so for broadcasters that don't have audio loggers that go back to 2024, how can we provide the newscasts and reports? Will the scripts suffice?
If through the script we can copy paste the header, for example, the title or the headline from your content and find it on Google, then yes, it would work.
Okay. What are the minimum requirements to be deemed a journalist? So if you look at the eligibility policy for broadcasters and specifically the payment calculation policy for broadcasters, you will see very clearly there's a list of eligible tasks and a list of tasks that are not eligible. And so you'll be able to use that as your guide to see what we consider employee tasks that contribute to the production of original news content. Okay. So there's a follow-up question to my previous one to clarify this audio that was broadcast live on the radio station. I'm not sure how that would ever index on Google. So because the content needs to have been indexed on Google to be eligible to share in compensation, that definitely is a requirement. And not all live radio is indexed on Google. And if it's not indexed on Google, then it just means that you're not eligible to share in compensation. So unfortunately, there are some broadcasters whose content where you won't be able to participate in being compensated, because the program is based on, if Google was listing your news content without compensation, we are now compensating you. There's a question, what are the minimum training requirements to be deemed a journalist? Gabrielle, do you want to answer that one?
Yes. I mean, we're not asking if you have an undergrad or a master degree in journalism. So again, it really comes, like, we're not going to ask for like press cards, or we're really looking at the tasks. So if you consider that your person is doing some journalistic tasks, again, listed in the list on our website, then they would be eligible.
Okay. So another question. So regarding online news pages and radio broadcasts, so we are one employer. All news employees go out and source their own news items, and then they are broadcast on air and posted on the website. all newscasts say to go to the website for up-to-date news. So all hours submitted are for both mediums. So do we need to provide links for both? The online news page and the radio broadcast. So I believe those are the two outlets. And then yes, for each outlet, you would need to provide links. I hope that answers your question. Okay. And I think, is there anything else we can say about how to, for broadcasters, how can they know if their content was indexed on Google or not?
So they can do the research themselves, right? So you take, again, the headline of one of your content, you copy paste it on Google, and then if it appears, then it means that you are indexed on Google. So it's not, it's quite simple, but if you want to make sure, you can do this process easily.
Okay. I don't see any new questions. Does anyone else have something that we haven't covered yet? Okay, we might leave it there then. Thanks everyone for attending. We're really happy to have been able to offer this session. Please let us know if you have any questions through the application process. Again, the portal opens on September 9th and closes on October 3rd. This year two of funding will be administered over the course of this fall. We'll be sending out determination letters to all eligible and ineligible applicants. And then at the end of this calendar year, and then in early 2026, the funding will be dispersed. Okay, thank you everyone. And we look forward to speaking to you in the near future.